name is Mary Lund. I'm a fourth generation of this area, living by the water, the blue water. And this is my story. I was born in 1953 in July 5th to be exact. And in July, my mom said after the 4th of July, I was like a firecracker is how she said it was. But it was because there was a tornado the month before that actually went through near my parents' home at the time. I saw the pictures, and the house that was next to, the garage that was next to the house was like toothpicks. I remember that photo very much. She said my dad took her and placed her between the refrigerator and a wall so that she was secure and safe. So I'm glad he knew what to do. So that's how I came into the world, and I lived in Port Huron up until I was in 8th grade, and then we moved to Marysville. But I'd like to talk about my background. The Thompson family is my dad's side, and the Costello family is my mother's side. And the Thompson family was pretty into historical things. They taught me to love history because there were many people in my background that apparently had done some pretty cool stuff. And just to name one activity, I come from a long line of Lakers that love the water and the sea. And one of the Lakers was my great-grandfather, who was Captain Robert Perry Thompson, and he owned a tugboat called the Sport. And the Sport was well known because it was a steel-hulled vessel, and the first in North America, they believe, and it was just a prototype of using Bessemer steel to try something new from Europe, and people were very pleased with this product, or the prototype. And my great-grandfather ended up being the last person to own that tugboat because it sank. And it sank in 1920, December 13th, during a gale storm. He was heading to Harbor Beach to pick up a barge. They left at 6 o'clock. There were 6 aboard, and he was one of them, the captain, and they did live to tell the story. So that piqued my interest right away into things that had to do with maritime history. And I have researched a lot on that. My grandfather, that was the grandson of the captain, kept really good records. He kept a lot of photos. He had a book, a 100-year-old book that has what he did when he was in service, boot camp, I guess, in Virginia. And he also kept a record book that he hand-wrote, whoa, it's falling apart, and gave to each grandchild. So I have to type all that up somewhere or get it on digital format. So on that side, I have a lot of information, and I think I got determination from that side because you didn't quit. This is the only family photo we have of the Thompson family. And there were 3 boys and 3 girls. The girls came first in a row, and then 3 boys. They all did different things. My Aunt Tessie was actually a woman navigator on the Great Lakes. She was ahead of her time, and she didn't put up with much. She said, I'm going out on the test. Okay, this was my grandfather when he was a young boy, and this would be Aunt Tessie, who became Tugboat Tessie. She was known that way. There were many articles about her and what she did in her life. You were never a quitter if you were a Thompson, so that was what I was raised on from that side. On my mom's side, it was the true Ellis Island story where 2 immigrants came over from Italy. They came from Sicily. The last name was Costello. It was changed when they came through the port. It actually was Costella with an A over in Italy. They came over, and my mom was born in Kentwood, Louisiana, because they came through New Orleans area. And they lived down south for a while, but eventually they moved to Port Huron. And my mom and dad met in high school, and they found each other at that time, and that was the start of my story. I had 2 wonderful parents, different as night and day actually, because my dad's family was pretty up there in society. They did a lot of things, they volunteered and all that. My mom's side, they were hard workers, but they were immigrants, and she often talked about she had 4 dresses. And I remember she'd say, well, I only had 4 dresses when I was growing up. And she made a lot of my clothes when I was growing up. I look back at photos and realize she was quite the seamstress in her day. And she also did a lot of ice show program costumes and was known well for her sewing and her ability. She was very creative and very compassionate. So on the Italian side, I felt I got a lot of creativity from that side and a lot of compassion. I was named after a sister that died. This is Mary, one of the pictures I have of her. And she died of appendicitis attack. They didn't have a car. They were in Louisiana, and they couldn't get her to the hospital in time. So everyone in our Italian side has a daughter named Mary after her. So I didn't know much about her, but I always heard that was her name. She was 26. So as children experience childhood, my memories of my childhood were pretty good. One unusual thing that I often tell, I'm a retired teacher, I tell classrooms, I had a pet monkey. And you could get friends if you had a pet monkey. You just said, you want to come over to my house and see the pet monkey. And it was a ring-tailed monkey, like an organ grinder monkey, if you call it that. And I often asked my mom, why did we get a monkey? I mean, did you say Dad could do that? And she said, no, he just came home with it. And we had a little cage he built that was in a sun porch room. And we took it out of the cage, and my mom made outfits for it. And we had, of course, a chain for it, and it would sit on my dad's shoulder. It got loose a couple times in the house. That wasn't bad, but it got loose outside once. And we as children found out it was on top of a roof of some lady's house, and there were people looking up. And my brother was smart enough to get a smelt net, and somehow we caught the monkey and got him back. He lived about 4 years with us, and we had always something to write about in school. They said, write about something interesting. I'd write about the monkey stories because there were a lot of them. So that was my childhood. Things were pretty average, lots of fun in the area. There were always kids to play with. You went out in the summer and you didn't come back except to wash your hands, use the bathroom, and you played and played hard. I enjoyed living in that area in Port Huron. When I was in 8th grade, we moved to Marysville, and it was like I had to leave my friends behind, so I wasn't too excited about that. But I did have a really good childhood with camping and unusual trips to different historical areas. I even went to Yellowstone Park and saw a lot of that when I was young, and we traveled even to Mexico City with a camper. And people just didn't do that then. But my parents were very adventurous. In 3rd grade, I had a sad event. My dad found out he had cancer. He had bladder cancer. As cancer goes, it's a pretty self-contained cancer. But as a child, it was very scary. But what I learned from that was it kind of set our household into an up and down experience when he went for treatments and that. We were all worried he'd get a good report, and we didn't want to hear a bad report. And things went along. Pretty soon I totally forgot he had an illness. That's just how he was. He just didn't complain. We just watched him do the normal things a person does. So I have to give it to my dad. He's gone now, of course, but he lived to be in his 80s, and he did everything that you normally do. It wasn't a feel sorry for me type person at all. And we didn't complain. If we had a sore throat, we didn't bring it up much, because here he was with this big cancer threat, but he was a positive thinker, and I think that did help him through that. He always thought about, don't talk negativity, think of what you can do that's positive, and he was a hard worker and showed us that. I went into high school, and at that time I was very shy. I was the new girl in Marysville, and I didn't know many people, but eventually I kind of came out of my shell. And the next thing that happened was I met my husband. I was 17, just turned 17. And I met my husband to be at Blue Water Festival. It's pretty romantic when I think back, because it was a carnival. And he happened to be with some boys or young men that knew the girls I was with. So it was typical meeting, talking, and we had good chemistry right away. And it was love at first sight. It really was. And we will be married 44 years in April. So I can't say enough about that romance. It was quite the romance. And we kid about it now. We talk about our memories, and his version is different than my version. And it's kind of fun to go back into that time period. So after we married, I had another tragedy in my life. It was I actually lost a sibling in a car accident, and he was 25. He left 2 children behind. And that was hard. That was the reality that life can be very cruel and live in the moment type thing. And the children he left behind, we made sure, my sister and I, that we were close to those children because they didn't have my brother. And when my sister-in-law was 42, she died of cancer. So they were left without a mom, or a mom and dad. And then their children had children. So I've been like a surrogate grandmother for them. And I still miss my brother to this day. He was the stinker of the family, got me in trouble. I often tell stories about him. He's a lot of fun to talk about because he truly was the big brother type that could connive his way into a situation and had that cute little smile, like he got away with it. And so, as I said, I really do still miss him a lot, but I learned a lot from him. After I got married and after I lost my brother, I started to have my children. And I had my daughter, and she was born in 1977. Before that, my husband was teaching karate on a side job, and I decided I wanted to learn karate. There weren't women in the sport at all, and I was raised to be a person that thought women can do anything. This is a photograph from when we were teaching at the YMCA. I also taught women's self-defense. I had a yellow belt. That's the beginning. And we had a lot of fun times with that. We competed different places. We taught several different places. And we were very active in that for a long time. And I learned, I came out of, my self-esteem was better because I could do things like break a board, and I could express myself and show that I had the ability to compete. Kind of wish I'd stayed in it, but my children came first, and so I had my daughter, and I got busy with motherhood. I had my son. At that time, I quit my job. I worked in a pretty good union-paid job, which was a pharmacy job, and it was a place called Arnold's. Some people remember Arnold's. It was in Marysville, and I worked there. And finally, I decided I'm going to quit this job and stay home with my children, which was kind of not done in our family. It was like, don't give up your job, it's a good job. But I went with my heart, and I wanted to go back to school. So I went back to school at SC4. At SC4, I took a class called Career Development. At that time, it showed I would be similar to most special education teachers. All the tests proved that that's where most people of your background head. And I thought, being a teacher, my mom wanted to be a phys ed teacher. I thought maybe I should try that. Maybe I should try to go for it. So I started the journey back into education with my husband's help and a lot of support from family members. And I took all the classes I could at SC4. And then I was going to transfer to Wayne State University, but all of a sudden it was like, is there money for this? But I had the dream. I want to get the education. And at that time, I had stock. And I didn't know anything about stock, but the stock split, which is a really good thing, I found out. And when it split, it was my first tuition for Wayne State University. And I thought, that's a sign. That's something from above telling me I'm supposed to do this. So I started my school training through Wayne State University. I drove it. There weren't cell phones. There was not distance learning. It was you sat in the class, took the notes, and I worked hard. And I worked at it full time around the semesters. I even did it during summer. I remember my son, Richard, I should mention, was in Little League. I can remember going there and opening up my notes, reading, and they'd say, Richie's up to bat, and I'd look up. So I wanted it that bad. I wanted to become a teacher, and I was very proud of how my grades were. And I decided, it took me a little bit longer than most people, but I decided I was going to get that certificate and become a teacher. My daughter's name is Courtney. She also was skating at the time. She was a 14-year skater, competed, and we had a lot of fun at the arenas with her skating. And she had to get up and go to school at middle school, and she had to do her skating lessons before school. So I had to drop her off about 5 a.m. at a cold arena. Then I'd take off for Wayne State University, and she'd skate, and mother-in-law would come pick her up and drop her at school. So we all had these different things going on. My husband's job became very, very busy. He was working for Ontario Dye International over here, and he ended up being a computer-aided designer, but in the beginning, no, he did everything by hand, And then eventually that was all changed to laser cutting. And if you know anything about technology, I know it went fast. It switched from this to this really quick. I graduated. I had my first, well, this is when I got my master's. I got my bachelor's, and I remember thinking these people had these blue velvet things around their neck, and I wanted one. And that meant you had your master's. And I did this partly because my dad always said, get a college education. I was the first one in the family to receive a college education. So part of me was like, I wanted to show my dad, I can do it. I'm fulfilling the dream you probably had. You wanted a child to get a college degree, and I did that. Consequently, my sister went back. My daughter and son both became teachers, and I have two nieces that became teachers, so we've got a lot of teachers in the family. And it all kind of goes back to my mom wanting to be a teacher, I think, because she was very good at showing us how to do things and step by step. So now I've had my kids, and I finally get my degree. And it took me a while to get a job because things economically were frozen at the time. So I worked, and everybody said, you have a special education degree, you'll be hired immediately. Not so. I had to wait until the right time came, and I did hire in. And I worked at Woodrow Wilson full-time. I hired in at Indian Woods Elementary. At that time, they called special education TMI, trainable mental impairment. That's what I started with, and I had a 50% job there. Then I switched to Woodrow Wilson when I picked up a full-time job, not just 50%. I remember expressing to the principal I was sorry I had to leave, but my husband had worked a lot of overtime to get me through college debt-free. So that was important to us. My goal was to get through college so I could get my kids through college. If we hadn't made those decisions, they wouldn't have gone to college probably, because that was our goal. And they did fulfill our goal, which was to get on your own. We were to raise them and don't come back home, and then we'll know we're successful. So in my teaching years, I taught mostly at Woodrow Wilson School. I enjoyed that a lot. I met many people, many children. And I was always a teacher that liked to connect real life experiences for the children. I'm very proud of the work I did with the veterans. I did veteran assemblies for Memorial Day and Veterans Day. I had to push for those. Sometimes it wasn't easy to get those assemblies worked in, so especially with how people are about curriculum now, time on task. But I insisted this was important to the children to see heroes and know they were real heroes. So I pushed that a lot. We even went into Memorial Day parades as a school, a class. And we also connected with Iraq before Skype. I did a couple Iraq talks with the kids and soldiers, set it up through RISA, and they helped connect with the soldiers, and the kids sang songs to the soldiers. And there were quite a few people with teary eyes because it had an impact on people that had lost people or people that had been in the service. So I'm proud of that work. I also did grant writing with children. My last year that I taught, we got a grant and we got to go to the Michigan Aquarium that had just opened. And so I tried to teach the children, this is what you need in life. You need to be able to connect with people. You need to be able to know the real world's out there and what to do in the real world. At that time, I was a drama coach, and I was approached by Michigan Lake Divers, an organization they were scuba divers, and they said to me, would you be willing to come speak at one of our events about your great-grandfather's boat, the sport? Of course, I said yes. Then I all of a sudden realized what I had said, and I went to my mom immediately because she had a lot of the background, and I said, you're going to speak with me, Mom. My dad was ill at the time, and he could not speak. He was non-vocal at the time, so we both kind of felt this is what Dad would like. So we researched things, and we went and we had a talk in front of the men. They videotaped it. And then after the talk, the president came to me and he said, would you be willing to earn money to redesignate the sport as a historical landmark underwater? And I said, oh, what's happened? And he said, well, the sign that was placed there years ago has disintegrated. And it told the story of the sport, and we'd like to put it back down there. And I said, okay, what kind of money are you talking? And they said, well, it's quite a bit, but anything would help. So I said, okay, I'll see what I can do when I go back to school. And that summer I happened to be going to a writing clinic, which is out on the water, and all writers signed up, and we had time to write. At that time, we'd write, we'd go away and share our writing later. And it just was meant to be because I wrote about the sport, and it came from nowhere. I wrote a play. And I had the play go forward and backwards, flashback, and forward when it was modern day, when the sport was discovered, different things like that. And I was pretty proud of myself because I somehow knew how to write a play. So I took it to school, and the kids loved it. They wanted to be the captain. They wanted to be Jim, who we know was the reason the tug sunk. Jim got seasick. They loved the part where they had to pretend they were throwing up. And we added music the second year, and it was a happy time for the children. So I did drama club in that school, Woodrow Wilson, at that time, I was at Garfield Elementary, and we did the play there 3 years in a row. We changed it a couple times. The kids actually wrote with me. The Titanic anniversary was coming around, so we decided to put the ghost of the captain of the Titanic in there, and we wrote what the ghost would say. And we just called that one more of a trip, a nautical trip. So we visited different things like Edmund Fitzgerald, and we rang the bell. And the kids just loved learning about the maritime history. They would come back and tell me, you know what I found out? I found out I had an uncle that's on the freighters. So it was real world connections. And I miss that the most, I think, because the kids just were so much fun to watch. My mother put together a book. You can tell it was my mother. It's very colorful. And it's about the captain and the ship that went down the sport. And it went down December 13, 1920. And on this particular page, there's a print, and it shows the Taj Mahal. We heard about that a lot. My mom said they threw quarters in the water or whatever, money, and kids would dive in after the money. And since then, I've heard from many people that was the case. This would have been my great-grandfather's business. It says Thompson Tug Company. And you can see by the cars, this I believe was in 1917. And this would be the great-grandfather. This was his business. It says the things that what they cost, like dynamite. He towed dynamite and gravel. And some of this is through the state of Michigan, the information. Then I told her, I was after her to write down what happened. How did you start finding out about the sport? Who came to you hunting for it? This is the original sign that went down. Governor Swainson was on board the Bramble when they celebrated that. So that was the first historical underwater sign that went down, and then it disintegrated, so they had a real problem. These are more family pictures, that famous things they did. This was the captain's family, and my grandfather's in here, this one. And there was a girl named Tessie, and she was called Tugboat Tessie. Later in life, she's another story. But she was tough as nails in 1920. She took the boat out. She became a pilot, a navigator on the Great Lakes. So that must be why I wanted to do karate, because she said, I can do anything a man can do. She lived to be 100-something. And this is when we actually got the money and remarked the sport. This would be what the sign looked like before we put it down under. And this tells about it. And you can go down there now if you're a scuba diver and see the sport. The little side story I have is the fact that I became a scuba diver. Didn't plan on doing that. And what happened was I told the kids, if we can earn enough money to mark the sport, maybe I'll take up scuba diving. Well, they earned enough money. And so all of a sudden I had to prove to them I was willing to do that, which was kind of scary. I was in my 50s, so I took the classes. They weren't too bad. I read the material, and then it was time to do the lake dive. And I kind of held off, and I was kind of not sure about it. My husband said, you did everything except the lake dive. Aren't you really going to do that? I said, okay, I'll check into it. So I set it up, and I did the lake dive. And from then on, I had all these wonderful people trying to get me out to the sport to dive it. And I was very lucky. A man named Jerry Daniels came along, and he said, I will help you get to the sport. And he did. And his son also helped. And we went out. The first time we were going to dive the sport, it was I looked at the water, I thought, I don't like that water, how it looks. And he pulled up and he said, it's too rough, you'd get sick out there, we're gonna have to try it another day. So it was in August. I went down. I didn't know I'd do this. I went down and I grabbed the wheel of the sport, and I was thinking, this is what my great-grandfather held when he decided he better turn around and head back to Port Huron because it was gonna go down. And so that was a really neat a feeling I had at that moment, and I do have it on video. So I was proud that I accomplished something to show the kids I could do that. And since then I did dive other places that were pretty cool. And so somewhere my Aunt Tessie, or Tugboat Tessie, was running through my veins there, the blood of a Laker and a person willing to try things. So that was pretty exciting for that side of the family to hear that. People say, oh, you look so good. What did you do? And I'm like, I retired. And as much as I love teaching and worked hard to do it, there came a point where I said I have to retire. My husband had retired first. And we wanted to travel. My daughter lives in North Carolina. My grandson lives there also. So it was time. And I still substitute because I do miss the kids a bit and I miss seeing people. So in retirement, I travel, I write, I paint. I'm still finding my way in retirement, but it is nice. My parents set a really good role model for retirement. They traveled a lot. They went to Hawaii twice. They went on cruises. My husband's side, they didn't have the same thing going. He grew up going to a farm in Minnesota and working the farm when he was a kid. I went all over traveling as a camper to Mount Rushmore and to New York, and he didn't understand what that meant to camp and go places, so I taught him right away, we're going to see things. So he's come around to traveling a little better than it was when we started. But my parents traveled a lot, and they were always excited about life. In fact, when they were in Hawaii, they sent a coconut in the mail. And this person came to the door with a coconut addressed to us, and boy, that was not easy to open up. You had to strip it like on Survivor Island, and you had to hit it with a sledgehammer, and it bounced across the basement. But they were kind of fun that way. And another thing my parents did was, my mom was probably one of the first women to be a ham radio operator. She always bragged she got her test before my dad did. And my uncle also was one. She passed her test before the men did. So you see where that came from. And this would be their call card. They had letters. They had to know the Morse code. And they would do the Morse code in the rooms to each other when they were practicing. I remember seeing it on a little cheat sheet in one room, and then you go in another room, it would be. So they had to know how to do Morse code. I think that was their novice testing. And then eventually they became ham radio operators. And my dad was into it more than my mom. He would be on there talking to people, and you send a card, and you meet the people sometimes down the road. And the thing was, he also did phone patches to Vietnam. And a phone patch to Vietnam meant that someone in Vietnam could actually talk to their family. And it took a while to get it all set up because you had to have a contact in Vietnam that had a ham radio, and you had to have the person there at a certain time, and then you had to have the family. You were going to use your phone to call them, and they were going to call in and talk or come to the radio, my dad's radio, and talk to their family. So they were pretty proud of that, and I think it was a really nice thing they did for families. Now we have Skype, now we have FaceTime and all those things. Technology's changed so much, but we don't want to lose the value of something like that in the time period it was, because it was special what they did. My retirement years are just starting. I've been retired. This is my 4th year, and I am going to Italy in June 2019 to meet relatives I've never met. This is an Italian cousin over there who actually looks like my daughter, and she contacted me. Her name's Nadia, and she said, "Are you ever coming to Italy?" And that was my mom's dream. She never did go, so I guess I'm kind of doing her dream here. I've got it set up to meet them. I want to see the village where my grandmother was born, or the village she was born in, and also where they were married, the church. So that'll be, I'll have to let you know about that. It was fun to start thinking about it, and now I'm studying Sicily, and I'm studying a little Italian, which I get mixed up with the Spanish, I know, but I can also just use facial expressions, I'm sure. they'll understand. So this will be a really good closure to the fact that on my Italian side, some came over, built a life here, and 2 of the families stayed in Sicily and built a olive oil business. So that's why they didn't come to America, I'm told. That's my story.